Welcome to Frame Inquiry, the podcast where we dive into the fascinating world of image makers, camera nerds, and the future of image creation, both moving and still. I'm your host, Jacob, and in each episode, we sit down with innovators, artists, and experts who are shaping the way we capture and perceive the world around us. Today, I'm thrilled to kick off our very first episode with a true pioneer in the field of digital photography, Steve Sasson. Steve is the inventor of the digital camera, a groundbreaking achievement that revolutionized how we take and share photos. From his early days tinkering with electronics to his career at Kodak, Steve's journey is one of curiosity, innovation, and perseverance. In this episode, we'll explore Steve's insights on the evolution of image technology, the ethics of AI in photography, and the importance of nurturing creativity and curiosity in the next generation. We'll also delve into some personal stories, like how Steve's mother taught herself to fix the family TV, sparking a lifelong passion for problem solving and invention. So, whether you're a professional, an amateur, or just someone who loves a good story about ingenuity and the human spirit, Frame Inquiry is here to inspire and inform. Sit back, relax, and join me as we embark on the exciting journey into the world of moving and still images. And now, let's dive into our conversation with Steve Sasson. Well, thank you so much for hopping on the call. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to connect with you. I've got a bunch of different stuff I want to talk to you about. You know, a lot of the obvious stuff is very well documented. I kind of wanted to start this conversation off talking a little bit about your upbringing. I am a young father. I have two little kids. I have a soon-to-be 3-year-old and a 9-month-old. So my house is quite busy, quite loud, quite hectic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I was intrigued by something that you shared. I can't remember where it was that I read. You were talking about your mother teaching herself how to fix your family TV. And I am so fascinated right now because of the stage of life that I'm in parenting and raising curious children and tinkering and messing with things. And I just kind of wanted to hear a little bit about your mom's parenting style and see what you could kind of speak to about that.
Oh, well, interesting. My mom was born in Norway, and she came over here when she was about 8 years old and moved to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, where I was brought up. And Bay Ridge, Brooklyn at the time was quite a collection of Norwegians. It was the biggest collection of Norwegians outside of Norway back in the 1920s and 30s. So she was raised largely in Brooklyn, but it wasn't her native language. Of course, she learned English, of course. And I think that was one of the things that sort of, she was always learning new things because she was kind of forced to learn new things when she came here, to assimilate into a new society and things. And so when she brought us up, and there were three of us, I had an older brother, John, who was born in 1947, and then I was born in 1950, and my younger brother, Richard, was born in 1954. So there were three boys in Brooklyn, and we were brought up in a row house not too far from where my grandmother lived. And so, her parenting style was to pretty much let us do our thing. And in which case, in Brooklyn, your thing sometimes could be a little marginal, So my father, who was a longshoreman, he makes sure we towed the line pretty well. And my mother was kind of a Renaissance person. She was always curious about many things. And so if I told you that she actually designed and made every piece of clothing that she ever wore, all the dresses and everything, she did that. She taught English to students, Japanese students. She was a masterful cook. Some of her recipes were copied and used in the hotel in Tokyo, the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo. She would fix appliances. as best she could. She had no formal training in this. She only graduated from high school, and then she became a secretary. And so she didn't have much formal education after high school, but she was very, very smart. She played Scrabble, unbelievably well. And you mentioned the television sets. Yeah, she used to be what I call a tube jockey in TV. People would come to her, all her friends and stuff would say, my TV's, the sound has gone off, or the picture's gone, it's just a horizontal line. There would be some sort of symbol or data that she would get from them, and she would know which tube to replace because the tubes would burn out. Mm-hmm. Or she would sometimes she would send me up to the drugstore with a tube and say, test this tube. You'd plug these things into little tube testers, and indeed they would tell you if the current and the voltage were proper on the tube or not. And of course, obviously, they wanted it to fail, so you'd buy a new tube, kind of thing, So that's how I remember that. So she was very interested in all these different things. She was very good at it, and the best way to describe her, she was a very quiet person, not boastful at all. So I called her an ultimate example of quiet competence. She was competent in so many things. She was a voracious reader. And everybody respected her, and they admired her. They'd ask her opinion on just about anything, kind of thing. But she was very humble, very quiet about it. She would not do it, which is opposite my father, who was Irish, who would always tell stories and get you going and all that kind of stuff. And so I had this balance being brought up of a quiet, competent person that was very bright, and my father, who had a great sense of humor and could relate to people really well. My mother could too, but she was so, she was just quiet about it. She was Norwegian, kind of. Mm-hmm. Norwegians are not known for being boisterous my mother could not tell a joke though. She was not good at jokes. And my father was joking all the time, So it was really, I was very fortunate to be brought up by those two personalities.
Do you think it was, how aware of it were you, or is it just kind of osmosis, being around that kind of problem-solving, quiet, confident attitude? Or when did you get the awareness that that really impacted, your career?
You don't realize it because it's your mom, you don't realize it till later. So that's like your mom, that's kind of thing. But when you look back on it and when you compare, what you've done in your life to what she's done, you just get humbled because, she came here as an 8-year-old girl, didn't speak English, and then she had to deal with all of the issues associated with assimilating into new society, and then she learned all these things, and she worked as a secretary, and all the presidents of these companies she worked for. She used to work for Cotton Incorporated in Manhattan. They all wanted her because she was way above a typical secretary. She could figure shit out. I mean, basically,
it sounds
what she
like
would do, and so she was very sought after. But this was her thing. What she did. She could have run companies, but she didn't. She didn't ever seem to want to do that. She seemed very content to, be okay. And I think had something to do with, being brought up in the Depression.
Yeah.
And they knew how bad things could get. I remember when I first moved to Rochester and I was buying a house, and I told her we were buying a washing machine and a dryer. And she says, "Oh my God, you're so lucky. You can actually buy a washer and dryer. Wow. And you're only 25 years old." And I'm going, what are you talking about? But that's her frame of reference. There was nothing in Norway, and in the 1920s, it was an extremely poor country. They hadn't discovered the oil and all that kind of stuff that they've got now. And so they were very deprived of things. And so she was brought up in her formative years in that, not only the Depression, but coming from Norway. And I think that never left her, and so these touch points I used to get when I was growing up, I would always be amazed that, of course I got a hot washer and dryer. Mom, everybody gets one. Oh boy, when I was young, that was like if you could get a washer and dryer. Do you hang she'd say, do you hang your clothes out to dry on the line? I said, "Oh, I got a dryer, Mom." And she had a dryer now too, but she was just amazed that at my young age, I could have these things that she spent her life trying to acquire, and that was, then you start to realize what she was like and kind of thing. And I always admired her humble competence. She was probably the smartest person in the room 90% of the time, but you'd never know it. But she would figure it out. She'd ask questions even when I was going to school. I remember her going through one of my books on electrophysics, where we were discovering the physics around transistors and things like that. And she's looked at the page one time and she said, "Do you understand all that?" And I said, "Well, I hope so, Ma. They're going to test me on it, And she says, "Oh, that sounds exciting." I mean, you could see that she kind of wished she had the opportunities that I was having and my brothers were having, kind of thing. But she didn't regret it at all. She just, you could just see the difference. So
yeah, she was probably so tickled to see the career path of you.
Yeah, and she was. She was. She was, for all three of us. All three of us became engineers. My older brother, John, became a civil engineer, and he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in New York City area. And my younger brother became a chemical engineer. He ended up working for Chevron, but he worked for a couple of companies before that down in the, Texas and that area. And we all went to the same high school, Brooklyn Technical High School, which was one of the elite schools in New York City. New York City had a series, and they still do, I think, of a few schools around the whole city where you had to take a test to get into. And if you got into it, it was a really good education. But they could throw you out of that school at any time if you didn't make grades.
Oh, wow.
And it was a public school. You didn't have to pay anything for it. It was a public school, but they could throw you out and send you back to your local high school if you didn't make the grades, kind of thing. So all three of us managed to get in there. And I think she appreciated, the wonderful education that we got there as well. So
how did you get your hands on the ham radio? Did she give it to you?
No, the ham radio, I got interested, I got interested in technology, really early on, just because there was so many cool things going on. The space race was going on and all that. Technology was all around us and things were moving quicker. And so you got interested in it. And I first got interested in chemistry, and I used to do chemical experiments with a boy that was 2 doors down from mine. His name is Don Reinertsen, and he was quite a famous author now about innovation and industrial policy and stuff like that. And he and I used to do experiments where he'd set off gunpowder and try to, all things that if you tried to do that today, you'd be arrested right away. But we used to go to the drugstore and try to talk the guy into giving us potassium nitrate, because, we thought, well, we'll just ask for potassium nitrate. They won't know we're trying to make gunpowder, But anyway, awesome. that got to be dangerous and too much smoke and fire and things. And so I got interested in electronics, and we used to do communication between the two houses. We ran a wire over there so we could talk over an intercom, me and Don. So we started doing that kind of stuff. And then I started thinking about radio, and I started to build things. And I got my parts from all of the people who used to throw out old TVs. Again, I was aware of this because my mother was having me replace tubes. So I would go out and drag these old TVs home that I found on the curb that people had put out for the garbage. And I would do autopsies on them, take the parts and everything off of them. And that became my collection of parts that I would use for my projects. So what projects, right? Well, first I started thinking about audio amplifiers and stuff because I was listening to music. And then, of course, radios. But then to build a radio, you could buy a radio pretty cheap. I said, but I could talk at a distance. So talking at a distance, that was ham radio. So I got interested in that. And so I had to take a test, to do Morse code and things like that. And at 13, I got a general class license. And then I said, well, now I want to talk to people on the radio. So I bought a Heathkit. And Heathkit was a company that used to build electronic kits. They'd sell you a kit and you'd build it yourself with their instructions.
Okay.
And it was a little transmitter, 60-watt transmitter. And then I bought a receiver from Lafayette. It was an electronics store at the time. And then I had to put an antenna up on the roof, and we had lived in a row house. So I couldn't put a big antenna, but you have to build an antenna that has a certain wavelength, a proportionate wavelength for the amateur band you're working on. So I chose 15 meters because that would make me have an antenna that would probably be around 23, 24 feet long, as I remember. And so I could fit that on the roof, and I put that up there. And then I started to transmit, and of course, I knocked out all the TVs in the neighborhood. So I had to go around and put filters on the TV sets so that I wouldn't create a bad situation for the neighbors, because my parents were really upset about that. You can't knock out the churches next door radio television when you transmit. So
Yeah.
that's how I started in amateur radio, down in the basement next to the furnace. I set up my little radio, and I go down and I would transmit first Morse code, and then I would use AM section on 15 meters, and I would do that stuff, and that got me interested in electronics for doing something with it. And I wasn't just building it so I could see lights flash. My first project exactly was something called a light. It was a series of neon lights that would flash. And when you watch TV all the time on the scientific, like Star Trek and things like that, they'd always have something like that in the background where the computer was working and little lights were flashing. And I found this little article where I could get 8 or 10 neon bulbs, and they would flash randomly if you built this circuit. And I built it I asked my father to give me his shaving kit, because it was just around the site size. It was like a little kit that you opened up and your shaver stuff was there. Took it all out and poked holes in it, put a 90-volt battery in there, put the circuitry in, it would flash. And I showed it to my father, and my father said, okay, not happy that his shaving kit was destroyed. And he said, what is this thing? And I says, well, it's a light. He said, what does it do? And I says, it really doesn't do much. It just flashes lights. But I was so proud of it. And he said, okay, so we'll call it the Do Nothing Box. And so that's how I got it called the Do Nothing Box. And many, many, many years later, when I was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, they asked me to duplicate the Do Nothing Box, which I did, which was hard to do, by the way, finding neon bulbs these days. And they put it in a museum down at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for a while. So
that's what I wanted to ask you that. Like, do you still tinker to this day? Do you still have the itch to do these kinds of things?
Well, yeah, it's changed now. I mean, all of the things I used to do were things to see if I could do it, and then it would be cool, right? Could I receive a transmission from far away? Could I transmit to something far away? Could I make a power supply? Could I make an amplifier that would sound really great? Or those are the things I tried to do. Now, of course, those things are so available, it's not even an issue. So, my curiosity now goes to more of the topics that seem to be streaming at us all the time, genomics, artificial intelligence, all of those things. I find those things fascinating, but they don't involve me building too much stuff.
Yeah.
Just because, I do tinker when I have to fix something. My wife gets a little annoyed with me because she says, well, let's get rid of that. No, let me fix it, kind of thing. Because I like taking stuff apart. But that's usually on the basis of having a need to do it rather than driven by curiosity. My curiosity is driven more by some of the topics that I find fascinating right now. So that's kind of how it's morphed over for me in my life. So
why don't we talk a little bit about that? Because that was some of the stuff that I kind of wanted to pick your brain about a little bit, was some of this AI image generation stuff, the ethics of it, all of that stuff. I was thinking we can kind of skip to that, but it fascinates me as well. I graduated from film school in 2008 with a bachelor's of science in film production. And, I've been a air quotes professional in the industry now for, 10, 15 years. And the way that it's changing my profession right now as I'm in it, it's hard to even perceive or understand because it's moving so quickly. Yeah. I am using AI tools every day in my editing softwares, and even now in my latest camera that I bought. I haven't read enough of the literature about it, but the autofocus is AI based. So it's all over the place. I can't even keep track of all of it. It all just moves so quickly. But, you know, how do I form this into a question? Like in the creative process of, let's just say, image creation, like where do you think that AI is going to play a role?
Oh,
if
everywhere.
you look forward, everywhere?
Everywhere. Yeah, everywhere. It's really scary, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the capability is scary. The speed at which the capability is being acquired and implemented is scary. And so nobody really knows where it's all going to go. You just know it's going to be, it's going to take over before we know it, right? It's funny. I had a discussion with Hirschberg, who used to be the head of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office copyright division, right? And I asked him. So I saw him just a couple of months ago, and I said, when it comes to copyrights and AI, how is the government going to handle this? I mean, this is just incredible. How do you?
Yeah.
How do you? I can just see so many issues. It's beyond my capability to see a pathway for copyrights to be viable, and
enforced.
And he had just retired. So he says, I'm retired and I have no idea, it's getting to be, well, I shouldn't say he had no idea, but I think he basically meant, I think he meant to say that's going to be a very difficult question for governments to get their arms around, right? And you see this happening with all these deep fakes and oh my God, you hear the stories all the time about these people where they're simulating a person's voice or look and
perfectly.
Are they stealing it? They're deriving it. They're deriving it from public information. So, the structures we have around legal protections don't seem to align at all. So I think it's going to be everywhere, and I think it's happening so fast that whatever pathway we take or wherever we end up, it won't be a logical pathway. It'll be one of, commercial reality, right? I mean, you're using programs. You probably use Photoshop and things like that, where they have all these tools now that are AI driven, right?
Yeah.
It's remarkable. I had a discussion once, and I said, people don't have to take pictures anymore. The picture's already been taken. It's just got to find it, and now I guess I have to add to that. And if you can't find it, you just make it.
Yeah,
you derive it. Yeah, you derive it. And then what's reality and all these stuff. And then my brain gets tired, because I just I don't know what's real anymore, because it can derive things. So, and it's so damn easy too.
I took a photo of my kids on the beach 2 days ago. I imported it into Lightroom, and there's this AI brush now. And there were some people in the background. There was just these two people right in between the silhouette of my kids. I just took the brush and I went shoop. And then they were perfectly gone. The horizon was perfectly maintained. The color balance was perfect. You could not tell that they were there. And it took me 2 seconds.
It took you 2 seconds, and you created an artificial image. That image never existed, right? It's more pleasing. It's more useful, but it's not true. So then you say, okay, here's a picture. This is the picture I wanted to take, and okay, kind of thing. So it's a hard question to answer. I don't have a good answer at all. I just know I can't keep up with it. And there's good things about it. My daughter is an infectious disease doctor, and I talked to her about how AI might be affecting her business and stuff. And I think it's going to affect everything. It's affecting radiologists right now, right? They're reading all of these mammograms and X-rays, and they're being read by machines. I think they're sort of proofread by experts now or something. But how long is that going to last? There's going to be enough data to show it's pretty good.
When I met my wife, she was at a company that was since been acquired by Intel, but they were using machine learning to machine learning to predict when airplane parts would go bad, so that like
Oh,
Boeing
yeah,
and Airbus could predictively
yeah.
say this tiny little component on the right wing at this many miles needs to be replaced before you take off, like super specific parts that they could predict when they need to order parts for different planes, because our
Right.
planes are really old. And this was 10 years ago even.
Yeah,
It's wild.
Yeah.
Something you said, I read yesterday, I thought and I was like, I wonder if, Sam Altman and those open AI guys are thinking about this. You said, one thing that you didn't realize when you were inventing the digital camera is that other people were inventing around you. And,
Yeah.
and you didn't have any idea of what those things were. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, okay, at all of these very well-funded AI companies, are they thinking about those things as well? Like the implications of what other people inventing around them?
What are other people? With digital photography, there was so many other things going on, and they're being developed by different people. The internet, printing, wideband networks, all that kind of stuff. And nobody was pulling that all together, right? Nobody was talking about social networks, right? I mean, it just wasn't in our discussions. Most of the discussions around a fundamental invention, especially in the early days, is done in the framework of the present, right? And the present was VCRs and NTSC television, and that's how you're judging it, right? But so many things were happening at the same time that we should have been much more imaginative, I guess, about things. We worried about how many pixels could be put on a piece of silicon in how many years, is Moore's law really going to hold up? Are people going to be willing to watch their pictures electronically as opposed to using paper? And you had a long history of it. That's the way it was. So why will it change? And why will it change so quickly if you're saying this, and you have no data to support your projections, only what you see, and you say, well, this just makes a lot of sense. I could never prove that digital photography was going to work. I believed it was going to happen. I worked exclusively on it my entire career. But I was always waiting. I was never the smartest person in the room, and I was always waiting for some old graybeard to come in from the labs or something and say, well, the second law of thermodynamics is going to prohibit line widths from ever getting this small, so therefore this will never exist, because the laws of physics say so, right? But nobody ever said that. Nobody ever said that. People gave opinions about things, how fast things could go and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't. So, and they were just giving opinions about what they knew about, right? They didn't think about other areas, other sciences, other parts of the scientific world that were going to create the incentive to do what you're doing even faster, right? Mm-hmm. For example, microprocessors, okay, that's great, but do I really need them to run this fast, right? Well, wait a second, I'm going to be doing image processing now, right? Well, that's a lot of calculation. You don't need that for audio, maybe. You don't need it for dealing with a computer on a screen. All of a sudden, so the drive to develop some of these technologies comes from the things being developed in other areas. Right? And if there's one thing that I think that I saw there that I underestimated, was I didn't think boldly enough. In general, I don't think any of us did. We thought about our industry. We didn't think about the world and how it was changing. And it did. Everything changed, right?
Why do you think you weren't thinking about that?
Because you're trying to solve a problem. I was worried about, how do we get, memory? I remember obsessing in the early 80s. How am I going to come up with a form of digital film that is something that could store digital data, but be as robust as a piece of film? Yeah. No battery, no environmental. It's gonna be there. It's got to be there as good as film, right? Because you can't replace a technology with something worse, right? And so, I explored, writable proms and things like that. And I went to General Instruments and got some of their devices and, and I was struggling solving these fundamental, or trying to see a pathway to how we could get some of these technologies, piece them together to create this vision of a camera that would take really good pictures without consuming anything. All it did was use a few joules of energy, and that was kind of the dream, right? And then to display it, again, not using any materials. Right? Obviously, Kodak didn't like that idea, but the fact is that that was kind of the dream. So so you're solving all of those problems to solve that dream. Now, I didn't think about, well, why would if somebody had this thing, what would they do with it? They're going to take pictures like they do now. No, they're going to have it so small, they'll take pictures of things they wouldn't even think about taking pictures now. And they're going to share it instantly because now they're going to be able to transmit the digital data really quickly. Well, I didn't think about that so much. I mean, I was just thinking of replacing, conventional photography with this new form of photography, and it would have some advantages, being able to see it right away, and you would be able to transmit it. But I didn't think about the incredible, all the work that Eric Fossum did in developing the active pixel that would use for CMOS, so you could put all this stuff on one chip, and all of a sudden now the camera becomes way smaller, way more light, way more, part of I didn't even think about cell phones, but, the fact that it would be made so small that it would be a convenience thing that you could just stick in your pocket. It wasn't something you carried deliberately just to take pictures. See, that's a whole thing that was developed. And I would hope that would happen, but I didn't think about how that would amplify the usefulness of the fundamental invention, right? Digital photography was great, but now if you could do all this other stuff, it was way more useful. So people would take way more pictures, and then that would constitute the need to transmit many more pictures, which means I need more bandwidth, which means developments in other areas. So that's how you if you're working in one field, sometimes you don't really appreciate what other people are doing. And then when they're successful, that's going to make what you're doing really, really useful. Or it might, in some cases, might make it useless, because it'll just bypass around it, right? So
could that have been when you're going back to you create the digital camera, you're in the room presenting your findings. Could that have been was there a person at Kodak that was trying to have this, let's call it the 30,000 foot view of the things that, you're in the technical weeds trying to just solve the problems like you just explained. Was there not a person in the room that was trying to have this broader scope picture of the implications? Was that maybe that's what I've wondered through this? Is there no one? There were people. Okay. There were people. When I presented the camera, I had the prototype working in the first half of 1975, and I would come into a room and take pictures of the people in the room. Would show the to them on the TV set right there, and then a conversation would start. And there's where what you were suggesting started to surface. People would, in some cases, it was defensive. Like, why would this ever happen? Well, how could this ever be done? When would this happen? That kind of thing. Then there were people who were thinking about opportunities where this thing could be useful. I never forget, there was one person, these people were invited. There was like 10 or 12 people in each room each time. I didn't know who they were. I was told to invite people because I was just a 25-year-old engineer. I didn't know a lot of these people, and they were all above me in the company anyway. So they came from different business units, and one of the business units that showed up at one of the meetings was a fellow from business imaging, and they used to do microfiche of checks. That was their business. And so he stopped me after I had taken the initial pictures and everything and showed everybody what it was working. And he stopped me and he stood up. I never forget this. It's funny how you remember these things. He was in the right side of the room, about 4 people back. I remember this. And he took out a check from his wallet and slammed it on the table and said, "Take a picture of this." And I remember being nervous because, I usually took 2 pictures and then hoped the camera would work enough for that, because it was a prototype and stopped working all the time. But anyway, I did. I said, okay, I went over, took a picture. It worked. The picture went up on the screen. He walked over to it and he looked at it and he said, "Not enough resolution." He says, "But this thing," and he looked at the other people in the room and he said, "This thing works better than anything I've ever seen anywhere else." And so he was thinking about the idea of digitally taking pictures of checks,
Okay. So there was a collection of people that would come in, and some people would look at it as a threat. Some people would be technically interested in it, curious about it. And then they would quickly isolate down to the 3 technical things that have to be done before this becomes really useful, right? Which we may or may not have expertise in, right? And then there were the people who were looking for opportunities, right? Like the check guy, right? And like I said, there were people who were afraid of. I never forget being asked, "Well, what's going to happen to the photo finishing business?" Photo finishers are all over the world, right? They asking me. I'm 25 years old. I never even thought about photo finishing business, but this was a big part of the world, and of course, being the naive person I was, I said, well, they could sell batteries. Which didn't go over that well. But the point was, it was the idea of it's just energy, guys. It's not materials. It's just energy. I'm capturing light and using a few joules of energy, and I'm going to be able to see that picture and store it. Right? That was the idea, and so they looked at it as a threat to an existing business, and they didn't see anything that would replace that business. You see, and it wasn't like I wasn't presenting an opportunity. I was presenting a threat to an existing business without providing any vision as to what could replace it. So
for some reason that's easier to do. As our human nature, it's easier to see things as a threat when extreme change comes. I think the same thing is happening now.
Because you know it. You're used to dealing with threats to existing businesses all the time, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, well, none of that matters anymore because we're going to do it this way, And so to answer your question, yes, there were people thinking about ideas and opportunities. They kept asking me things that I really hadn't thought about. I thought they would ask me about how I built this thing because I pulled all this technology together that hadn't been used before, and I used stuff that had just would come out. I was just lucky to be at the right place at the right time when this technology was so happening, and pulled it together. So I thought they never asked me how, never, not one question about how I did it. They asked me why I did it. Why? What problem are you trying to solve? What's wrong with photography today? Kind of thing. And so, and I wasn't prepared for that. I was not even thinking about that at the time. I was just trying to solve problems to get it running. And then once it was running, I said, okay, here's a basic architecture and it could work. Now, if the CCD were better and I could do color and I could store it faster, I could store more images, I could see how it could extrapolate from all the technical things from that point of view. And that's what I was focused on. But they were focused on, well, if you ever solved all those problems, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to make money? How are we going to make money kind of thing? Will it be ever as good as film? We had that discussion for the next 20 years. Would electronic imaging ever be as good as film? Actually, probably the next 30 years, actually. Really didn't resolve it to the early 2000s, I suppose. So, so I guess invention is all about creating more questions that you can possibly handle.
Do you shoot film anymore?
No, I don't shoot film anymore, but I understand people still do. It's coming back.
It's an expensive hobby, I'll tell you that.
It is an expensive hobby. I have friends still at Kodak, and Kodak still makes film, and there's a resurgence of film. And I've been to some photo stores that, regionally accept film, and they bring them in and they develop it and they print it, just like the old days. And there's people that love that, or people, mainly black and white people, who develop it themselves and print it themselves. And then that Super 8 movie camera that Kodak just launched that not too long ago, which has a business model which I don't quite understand, but evidently some people like to buy these things and cost them like $80 to shoot 3 minutes of film. But it's a look and a feel and a whole cultural thing that still exists. It's sort of like, record players and vinyl and things, I guess.
I think because we can so easily with digital erase those people like I did in my kid's beach photo, now going back to that is an artistic statement in and of itself. It's like, I am not taking shortcuts, There's something very human about it. There was an author, Harvey Wang from New York City, wrote a book called Digital to Darkness, I think it was. And he came and talked to me a couple of times. And
And when I read his book, he did basically little stories about many photographers, largely in the New York City area, that had to make the transition from film to digital and how they did it, right? And what I got out of that was their complete love of being in the darkroom and holding in their hand the essence of what they've captured. It's right there. It's there. You can see it. And they develop it and they touch it with their hands, and there's no worry about it. It's if you hold on to the film, you've got all the data you need. You don't have any image compression or artifacts. You don't have any lost things. And so there's a visceral human physical contact touch, and perhaps some of the solitude of the dark room and seeing the images come. It's very human, kind of thing. And that's where I kind of learned what people missed about film. So that may be part of the reason that film still exists and probably will exist for the longest period of time, because it's still a pretty damn good medium. It's just not efficient, but it's still a good medium, for what you want.
I use something called darkroom.com. They send me return labels. So I shoot a few rolls, ship it to them. They develop it, ship me back the negatives. I don't have the time with 2 little kids to have a darkroom, but it is a dream of mine to have one again. I had a little makeshift one in college, but it's a great service.
Yeah, it's a nice way to spend time.
Well, okay, so we've just got a little bit more time here. I want to kind of go to present day here, and again, talking selfishly, I kind of just want to pick your brain more about raising kids and invention, and what are some things that I can do as a dad to help my kids think differently? And I learned a lot about you just explaining kind of your childhood and what your mother was like, but it's just on my mind a lot to cultivate that environment for my kids. And it sounds like the work that you're doing now, you're pretty passionate about, bringing up the next generation of young inventors and what can I do to cultivate that curiosity?
Let me tell you a story. One time my mom had a leak in the refrigerator, and she took out all the insulation in the freezer because it had gotten wet because it had melted. And she put it in a bag and put it in the dryer and dried it out. And then when she opened it after the dryer was done, the insulation, which had come out in sort of layers, was all crumbled up and in pieces and like popcorn, completely destroyed. And I never forget her reaction when she looked in. She said, "Oof," and that was a Norwegian for oh, bad, kind of thing. And she didn't get mad at herself. She just was surprised, and she started instantly thinking about how I'm going to, now insulate the refrigerator, maybe go buy new stuff or something. And it has to do with how you treat, how people deal with failures, because innovation is inventors are wrong most of the time. Big secret here. Okay, you ask an inventor, they know way more about why things don't work than why they do, right? Because they go down a lot of rat holes. So if you're wrong a lot and you fail a lot, if you're beating yourself up or you're beating somebody else up because of it, you're not going to last. Okay. So you really have to look at failure as an opportunity to learn. My mother's oof wasn't, oh my God, I'm so stupid. It was oof, that was a mistake. How do I get out of this? Kind of thing. It was. And so as I talk to young people, sometimes I think our education today has to be so efficient because we have to be right all the time so I can get to the next grade or whatever. And sometimes just the joy of being wrong is so freeing because you're saying, I thought that was right. I had reasoned that through, and yet that's wrong. And that just causes you to reassess not only the idea you're working on, but the methodology you were using, and it expands your way of looking at the world, right? So I think we should be more generous with our failures. With people, and especially with young people. If you see young people crying because they got a bad mark on their test, I would say that's a bad sign. I would say, okay, you don't want to be happy that you got it wrong, but let's take this opportunity to figure out something that you didn't think about before, right? It's focus there, right? It's an opportunity to learn. If you read Edmund Morris wrote a great book about Thomas Edison. And if you read about Edison, this guy was Mr. Mistake. I mean, he was just throwing crap at the wall, right? I mean, he lived with failure all day long, right? And people had great expectations, certainly as he became more mature and was more well-known, great expectations about his success in inventing some of these marvelous things, right? But this guy, he was just dealing with failure all the time. And so, and he had a famous saying. He says, "It's just I just found another way how not to do something." He looked at it as I learned a way not to do what I thought I could do. I learned something. I've got something in the bank now that I didn't have before. He didn't look at it as a condemnation. He didn't look at it as a verdict. He looked at it as something now I have that I didn't have before. And I think a little bit of that has to go toward the efficiency that we're expecting out of the educational system, where you have to fail, and then you see why you failed and what path you were on, and now it's a modified path, and it keeps you to thinking about things like that. And I think I think that's one of the things that might be helpful for young people and for parents to remember that failure is really the way you learn. If you had the right answer the first time, you didn't learn anything. So I don't know, that'd be my take on it. And when I talk to young people, I kind of talk about. I've given some talks on failure, which is probably not the brightest thing to do when you go to a school, right? But I do. I talk about failures and all the great people that we admire. If you take a look at all these people that we admire, whether they be writers or sports figures or anything, they will always tell you that they spent more time being wrong, which is why they now are considered great. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of quotes from Michael Jordan and all these people, Thomas Edison. We admire them because they achieved all this stuff. And they'll tell you that I spent most of my time making mistakes. I missed most of the shots I took, right? You don't celebrate that, but I do, because that allowed me to do this thing that you admire so much. And I think we just lose sight of that because we just see the success.
I love what you said, finding the joy in failure. That's a nice little nugget there. I think that's really key. So last thing on this, but what do you say to a kid that you're talking to or mentoring or teaching that has maybe bad habits towards failure? How do you coach them out of that they get so discouraged, so frustrated with like their first mistake that they can't see clearly anymore because they're just frustrated? Like my daughter, I'm teaching her how to play baseball. She's got the tee ball in the backyard. She hits the tee and not the ball. She throws the bat down. She's like, I want to do it perfect, Papa.
Yeah. I went through that when I was younger, and I reached some sort of a conclusion around that. And that was, when you're getting upset about the failure and your behavior is such that it's usually because you're driven by what other people are going to think about you rather than what you think about the idea itself. So it's interest in yourself versus interest in the idea. If you're focused on the idea, you're oblivious to what people think about you. That's why, inventors are really notoriously bad dressers, because they don't really think about what people are looking at, right? They're thinking about the idea, right? It's not just inventors. I think anybody who's obsessed about something tends to derate all of those typical everyday human things because they're just kind of a slave to the idea. And I'm not saying to become pathological about anything, but my point is that when your daughter throws down the bat, she's mad because she thinks somebody's looking at her and judging her, because she's thinking, well, they're going to think I'm not good, or I'm not pretty, or I'm not athletic, kind of a thing. As opposed to, wow, the next time that ball comes in, I'm going to try to raise the bat a little bit higher. She's not trying to think about the idea of hitting the ball. She's thinking about what other people are going to think about her hitting the ball. And I think that's a little bit, it's the idea, it's the idea versus interest in yourself kind of thing. I think there's a little bit of that goes on. At least awesome. I noticed that kind of in myself. When I'm really possessed about something and I'm going a little nutty about something, they'll say, well, slow down, or what are you doing? Or, did you forget to eat lunch or whatever? It's because you're just, that's what you're focused on, the idea. You don't care about what people or other people are thinking about. But
I'll give you a real world example. Huh? Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, but it's like social networks. That's kind of the example of that. Everything's just out for people to judge, right?
Yep.
I was thinking, I don't even think you could invent if you were in a social network. Every time you do anything, you're going to get more opinions about what other people think about your idea, right? Not that they know any more than you do, but you get all these opinions.
That's just what I was about to mention. You mentioned notoriously bad dressers. Elon was getting dragged on social media. Elon Musk was getting dragged on social media today because they just landed 2 boosters yesterday. You probably saw in the news, a simultaneous landing, but he had a shirt on backwards, and that's what people were paying attention to. He put a SpaceX shirt on and it was on backwards, and they were like making fun of him for it. And I'm like, that's because he doesn't care and he's not thinking about that. His company just landed 2 rockets today. Like,
but there it is. That's thank you for that example. That's a perfect example of it. He's thinking about the accomplishment and the work and the challenges that they overcame and all that kind of thing. He's proud of the idea being manifested in an actual landing. He's not thinking about what people are thinking of him. Mm-hmm. He's interested in what people think about the idea. All right. And so, just stuff like that. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone with shirts reversed as well. I even did it with my shorts once. Don't start on that. I actually did that. I was going out the door and my wife looks at me and says, something? Your pockets are hanging outside your pants, which means you have your shorts on inside out. Mm. And I had done that, and because I hadn't thought at all about what I was looking about. I was thinking about what I was going to do that day or whatever.
Right.
So I don't do that a lot, but I have done it. So,
real quick, I think I got a couple rapid fire questions and then I'll let you go. I was just curious about a couple things. Leica Camera honored you, and I don't have the year. 2010, and they gave you a limited edition Leica M9. This is Wikipedia telling me this. I'm wondering, do you still have that camera? Yes,
I do. It's a Leica. It's a Leica M9 Platinum Edition. Actually, they were selling these things, and they were going for more than cars. It was a great honor to get it. And you might know that Leicas are all numbered, and every Leica's got a number. And if it's an even number, it's like really important and special. And I didn't know any of this at the time. Yeah, I didn't know that. But if you're a Leica person, if you've got I was told that the 3,750,000th Leica was given to Woody Allen because he made a picture about using a Leica in a picture or something. So they round number, and this number was the 4 millionth one. It's got 4 million written on it, right?
Wow.
Which makes it very special in the Leica world, I guess. So cool. I still have that camera. I'm afraid to take it out of the box because all my camera, historical people say it's worth so much, kind of thing. It's still a camera to me. It's a very nice camera, but I'm afraid to use it.
Yeah, I had to ask because I'm a big camera nerd. I've been obsessed with cameras since I was a little kid. My dad.
Are you? You've got to come to the George Eastman Museum.
I know. I have wanted to go for so long.
You've got to come. You come and I'll introduce you to Todd Gustafson, the curator there, and he'll take you down a camera vault. And if you like cameras,
I'm obsessed.
It's incredible what they've got down there. Cameras.
That's cool.
Going back to the first cameras sold in the United States, he's got down there, and so it's really cool stuff. So, if you're obsessed with cameras, you definitely need to take a trip.
Last thing here, this is kind of maybe a little abstract, but I'm just wondering, kind of looking for a non-typical answer here. Looking back on all of this, your career, Kodak, what do you have in mind or hope that people think of as your legacy?
Yeah, I don't think about legacy that much. To me, I'm just a lucky guy that happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right set of skills to make this contribution. If I hadn't done it, somebody else would have done it, and maybe better, and I probably would have done it Kodak because they had so many bright people there. So I don't really think much about legacy as such. If I were forced to think about it, I would just say that I am not a very special person. I am not particularly bright. I'm not particularly anything, really. I'm just kind of a kid from Brooklyn, right? But I was able to make this contribution, and the systems that I was part of, I mean, Kodak, scientific, educational systems, all enabled me to do that. So I'm a product of my environment. I'm a product of my education, my parents, and stuff like that, as anybody is. And so anybody can do these things. And if you're lucky enough, as I was, to be recognized for this thing, realize that you can do that. You can do that, but don't wait for it. It's not I didn't receive any recognition for any of this early work until many, many, many years after I did the work. And so maybe it allowed me to take a more mature view of this kind of thing. But it's not, the notoriety or the fame or whatever you want to call it is not the purpose of it at all. Too many people are looking for that today. It's the joy of being able to do something. And you don't have to be all that special to make a contribution. You don't have to be the world's expert in anything to make a contribution in that field, whatever field you're in. So just keep working at it, keep focused on it, and then you'll be able to make a contribution. And it may not be recognized immediately, it may not be recognized ever, but you'll know that you did it, which is, kind of a reward, I guess. I was very happy when the camera worked, I mean, I was just, wow, it works, kind of thing. So.